In today's episode, I'm walking you through how I use POGILs in my chemistry classroom. Not the theory behind them, but the practical details, when I use them, how I set them up, what my expectations are for students, and then how I grade them so participation actually happens. If you've ever tried a POGIL and felt like it turned into chaos, or you've been hesitant to try one at all, this episode is for you. So, first off, I like to use POGILs about once a unit. So, for me, a unit is about every 2 weeks. I don't always use them, I just pick and choose the ones that I like best. I really like to use them when the concepts have multiple steps, when students need to connect ideas, when students need to notice patterns, and then things that I think discussion will help the students understand better. It'll just help deepen their understanding. I like to think of POGILs as a tool for thinking and not a replacement for instruction. So that brings us to, when do I use POGILs? I usually use POGILs after I've given some direct instruction or lecture. I always give them before assessments. I think that they're a really good review of concepts overall. I think one of the ideas behind POGIL is that you're supposed to use them to have students explore the ideas. I like to think of them as ways that students can work in groups to connect the ideas and practice them. And so I think of these as active practice. In my last podcast, I kind of talked about independent practice versus active practice. I like to think of this as an active practice and not their first exposure to the material. So at the beginning of the school year, I really do take my time and go through what my expectations are, how I want students to complete these POGILs. I usually do this the day before we're going to do the POGIL. That way, maybe it's going to take 15 minutes. And if you've ever done a POGIL, you need almost the whole class period for it. And then the next day, I still am going to have the students model and go over the expectations, but it's going to be a lot quicker. So I think going through it 2 times really solidifies what my expectations are. And then if you had a student that was absent the previous day, they're on the same page as well. So for my materials, I do print off a separate POGIL for each student. And I get my POGILs mostly from Flynn Scientific. You can also find other POGIL style activities online, and there's other manufacturers that make them, but that's where I was introduced to them, is from Flynn. And then I also want to make sure that I am printing an answer key ahead of time for my co-teachers. That way that they can answer questions confidently as they're moving around the room. I do use job cards in my class. The job cards I have now are laminated, and there's a job card for each role that they have. The students are going to keep these job cards on their desks so I can see them, so I know which student has which job. If I notice a group isn't working very well, I can walk over and know who is supposed to do what job, and then give them a little assistance or just help redirect the group without having to stop the whole class. I'll go ahead and I'll link my cards in the show notes if you wanted to see what they look like. So some of my expectations during the POGIL is the noise level. I want the kids discussing the questions, but there's a fine balance between having productive discussions and kids yelling across the classroom at each other. Productive noise is okay. Oh, and let me just say that I really think having clear expectations for students really makes your POGILs go smoother. And honestly, the first time you do them is going to be maybe a little hot messy, but by like your 3rd and your 4th time, you're going to be just so impressed about how the students have improved. Another thing that I have for my student expectations is that the students need to stay in their group. So they can't be up around the classroom roaming around. They have to stay in their seat. In case students get stuck, I always tell them to ask another group before asking me, so they can just ask one of the groups that's closest to them without getting out of their chair. And if they don't know, then they can ask me, but this gives the other group an opportunity to teach them, and thereby having the other group learn more. We always say you learn more by teaching, so the other group is basically teaching the group that has a question, so they're learning it better as well. Another thing I tell the students is that they need to stay on the same question. So if one person's on question 2 and somebody's on question 7, that's not okay. I need them to all stay together. So there's no skipping ahead. And I tell the students that this is a learning activity, that everybody needs to move at the same pace. And so if you feel like you are going to skip ahead, it's your job to make sure that everybody else is understanding. And if you're maybe one of the slower students, it's your job to ask questions so that you do understand. Another thing in student expectations is these answer keys are available online. So I don't let students use phones or laptops during this activity just because I really want them to come up with the answers from within their own group and obviously not just look up the answers. One thing I remind the students at the beginning of the year and then really quickly before each POGIL is that people learn in different ways. Some people learn better through writing, some people through reading, discussing, listening. And so the idea is that when they do a POGIL, we're doing all of these things. We're learning in multiple ways to help that learning stick in their brain better. I also tell them that when we do these POGILs, we're doing a lot of interpreting models and analyzing data, and that this will be really helpful for those standardized assessments that they'll be taking. Now, what roles do I have? What are the different jobs that I have for students? So first off, I put the students in groups of 4. A group of 3 is okay, and if that happens, somebody's going to have to do 2 jobs, and it's fine. I really don't like groups of 5, just like you don't like lab groups of 4 or 5, because there's usually somebody doing nothing there. I'd rather have groups of 3 than groups of 4s and 5s. Also, when I am doing my grouping, I usually have students group up like right around each other. When I'm making my seating charts, I think, would this be a good POGIL group? But don't be afraid if you've got 2 students and you know they are not going to be on task, just go ahead and move them. And I'm super honest with them. They might be like, well, why didn't you let us work together? And I was like, well, last time I let you work together, you guys didn't really accomplish a lot, and I really need you to learn this topic. Okay, so let's get to the 4 roles. The first one is the manager. I sometimes call this the task manager. This is going to be the person that keeps the group on task. They're going to make sure that all the questions are answered and that everybody is participating the way that they should be. This is the boss of the group. The next one is the reader, and they're going to read the read this sections, they're going to read the questions, and then they're going to read the why. That's at the beginning of the POGIL. Having somebody read aloud, one, is great because it keeps the group on task and focused. It's also a great practice for reading aloud. Some of my students don't have an opportunity to read aloud a lot. Another job that I have is the spokesperson. This is going to be the person that's going to ask other groups questions. This is the only person that's allowed to ask the other groups a question. And they'll also get any supplies, additional papers, colored pencils, anything else like that we would need for the group. The spokesperson is going to get that. And then the summarizer is going to pull together the group's thinking and help create a clear written response. And ideally, everybody's going to have a very similar answer on their POGIL. And then they also need to make sure that everybody in the group is understanding why we wrote what we wrote. So the ideal flow for this is the reader would read the question. There'd be a group discussion about what the answer is. Then the summarizer is going to clarify. The group is going to agree if they like that answer, and then everybody's going to go ahead and write it down. And then you just go to the next question and repeat that. How I grade POGILs. So most of the time I'm grading for participation and completion. The whole point of the activity is for the students to work together, to have a good discussion, increase their understanding of what's going on. So a base grade that I normally give is just 2 points a page. I sometimes do grade for correctness, and most of the time when I am grading for correctness, it might be one question that I went over in class specifically. So some other problems that you can have when you're doing POGIL, these activities, is that one student could be doing everything, and that's usually like the smarty pants of your group. And I just like to remind everyone that if you are the smarty pants, in this situation, it's not about just getting the POGIL done. It's about making sure that you're understanding what's happening. And it's also an opportunity for them to explain to their other group members about the topic. And then those students that are not participating, I remind them that it's their responsibility to learn this content, and so that they need to be engaged in the activity and asking questions. Sometimes you have students say, "Can you just tell me the answer?" I'll tell my students, "I'm not going to be there to answer your question on the quiz. So you need to answer this question on your own." But then I'll just ask them questions that help them get to that answer that they're looking for. I structure my classroom normally in rows or paired up rows, so the students have a partner next to them. But for my POGIL groups, as I mentioned before, I like a group of 4. I am kind of particular about how I want the kids to move their desks. So if in the group of 4, it'd be 2 and 2. So the 2 kids that are in the front are going to turn their desks and face each other. And then the 2 kids that are behind just slide their desk forward. I don't want anybody's back turned to the front of the classroom. That way, if I do stop instruction to remind the students about something or go over a difficult problem, everybody can see. And this also allows me to see the students, make sure that they're being on task and not doing something they shouldn't be. And then, as I said before, I'm going to make sure that I have those job cards and that the job cards are on students' desks so that I can see them. Pogils can take a long time, and they do. So here's how I get around that. Sometimes I will split Pogils into 2 days. If there was 30 questions in the Pogil, I'll be like, "Hey, you got to get through questions 1 through 15 today. We'll get through 16 through 30 tomorrow." So that's definitely one option. If I know it was only like the first couple of pages that I felt were really important for the students to go through, let's say there was 5 pages in the Pogil and we only got through 4, well, I'm only going to score it out of those 8 points for those 4 pages. And then if kids get to the 5th page, then it'll be extra credit. There's also extension questions in there. Sometimes I do make the extension questions required because I think that they're really important, but then sometimes they're not applicable to what we're doing at that moment. For example, like the isotope Pogil is about isotopes, but then the extension questions are asking about ions, and we might not have covered ions. So I'll be like, "Hey, just give it a try, and if you get it, then I'll give you some extra credit." That way, the students that are finishing early have something to continue to do and not be disruptive to the class, and then other groups aren't frustrated that they didn't complete the Pogil as quickly as these other groups. And then, of course, you guys, for these, the learning is what matters for me. So if we don't get through the whole Pogil, it's okay. I just want to focus on what the important questions are. Then in the Flynn Pogils, they do have little keys next to them, like literal like drawings of keys. And then the kids know that those are the most important questions. Also in those Flynn Pogils, there's stop signs. So you need to figure out, do you want the kids to stop at those stop signs or do you not? I don't have them stop at the stop signs because kids are not answering these questions at the same pace. I'll usually wait for all the groups to get through it. I don't want the speedier groups to sit there doing nothing, so I tell them just to keep going. And then once I see that everyone has gotten through that section, I might stop and summarize or go over what I think the key point there should be. Some teacher tips: do the Pogil before you assign it. Some of the questions can be tricky in it, and you're more likely to know where the students are going to get stuck if you do it yourself. If you notice that students are stuck on the same problem, I'll stop class. I'll be like, "Let me get your attention. Let's check out number 8. It seems like some kids are stuck here." And then I'll either explain the vocabulary term that they're messing up on, or I'll ask them some other questions to think about, or say, "Look at this specific thing in Model 2 to answer this question." Now, as you're walking around the classroom and you're noticing that the kids are getting stuck on a vocabulary question, a concept, or even like a specific question, I will note that at the top of my answer key, and then the next period, I will go ahead and go over that with the kids. For example, if the word abundance was there, I would just say like, "Yo guys, you're gonna see this word in here, abundance. This is what this means." Again, if they should be referring to something specific in the model, I'll point that out. I'll be like, "Hey, this little hint, write this down next to question 10 so that you can solve it." Some of the questions in there are, think about this with your group. And then kids will get stuck for 5 minutes on those questions. And I'm like, "Guys, it just says think about it or propose." And so I just say, write something down and then move on. And then also by writing these little hints on the top of my POGIL, then the next year I'm going to remember that I need to go over this with period 1 so that my instruction is solid the next year. And then the POGIL books that I get from Flynn do come with some assessment questions. And so you can use those maybe as an exit ticket. As I have clearly stated in many of my previous podcasts, I love POGILs. I think that they're a super great active participation strategy. I like that they get to discuss it with each other. I like that they're reading models. I like that it is learning without direct instruction. This is a final couple of takeaways. POGILs are going to work best when you have explicit expectations. Don't be afraid to write what your expectations are on the board. You want to make sure, again, that the students know what their role is while they're doing the POGIL and that it's everybody's responsibility to learn. Another thing that I will sometimes do is I'll tell the kids if they didn't use their time wisely in class, I won't accept it as a late assignment. So I guess that would depend on what your school policies are, but that's something to consider too. But at the end of the year, my survey results are always like, it was boring doing those POGILs all the time, but they really did help me learn. So even if you're not getting the most positive feedback at first, keep going ahead with it. And then, see if their scores improve, see if their understanding of the topics is improving. So if you take one thing away from this episode, please make sure that you know that the POGILs aren't just a worksheet for the students to do, that it's designed to be a group thinking activity. You don't need to overhaul your entire teaching style to use a POGIL effectively. Just try one and then be clear about the roles and expectations and adjust as you go. And then if you are doing POGILs and you're doing something really awesome, please let me know what it is, because I'm always trying to make my classroom more awesome. I'd also appreciate any feedback on these episodes that you have. Are there any additional topics that you'd love to hear about? So I hope that today's episode about the POGIL was helpful. Hey everyone, as I was about to post my POGIL job cards to the show notes, I was like, ooh, these are a little bit outdated. So I went ahead and I updated them. When you guys get them, it has more student-friendly wording on there. And then I was also thinking, well, what else can I do to help you guys use POGILs? Because, I love them so much. And so I created a little quick start guide for you. So down in the show notes, you should be able to find a link for the POGIL Quick Start Opt-in. Just go ahead and click on that. Let me know what you guys think. I hope it helps. Bye.